Hey there, how's it going? My name is David and you're watching KCRC. On today's video, I thought we'd take a look at the thundershot chassis of buggies. I have the Thunder Dragon and Terra Scorcher here, but this video will include info on the thundershot, Thunder Dragon, Terra Scorcher, Fire Dragon and the most recent Saint Dragon. So if you're interested in any of these buggies, stick around, stay tuned and I'll tell you what I think. So this video is primarily intended for people who perhaps have no direct experience with any of the buggies on this chassis, or for people who maybe have one of the buggies and are considering getting another. This is the video for you. I think a good place to start would be with a bit of a timeline of these buggies, the backstory to them. The thundershot chassis was released in 1987 and in many ways it can be seen as an evolution of the earlier hotshot boomerang chassis. I think with this new chassis, Tamiya just wanted to address some of the weaknesses of the previous chassis, poor access to the electronics being the primary one. So this chassis debuted in 1987 with the release of the thundershot. That was followed in March 1988 by the Thunder Dragon. Later that year, around Christmas time, we saw the release of the Terra Scorcher, and the following year the Fire Dragon. And most recently, a fifth buggy is using this chassis, the re-released Saint Dragon, which is actually originally a two-wheel drive buggy, but Tamiya chose to re-release it on this four-wheel drive chassis. So in all there are 5 different buggies using this chassis. The chassis itself is a shaft-driven four-wheel drive double wishbone suspension design using a plastic bathtub. When I say shaft-driven, it's actually not much more than a glorified coat hanger, to be honest. The earlier Thundershot and Thunder Dragon both feature a monoshock up front, but the later Terra Scorcher, Fire Dragon, Saint Dragon have dual shocks front and rear. Now towards the late 80s, these were the affordable four-wheel drive buggies from Tamiya. I'm sure many people, myself included, would have loved to get their hands on a Vanquish or possibly even an Avanti, but that would have taken me an absolute eternity to save up for on my paper round, and so the Terra Scorcher, Thundershot, Thunder Dragon, etc. was something you could afford to buy and run. And I did. My parents got me one for, I believe it was Christmas or a birthday, and I raced that heavily at my local circuit. I didn't do too well as most other people were running Schumachers or Kyoshos of various configurations, but you know, I enjoyed myself, and that's the main thing. Design wise, they're all very unusual and unique. The Thundershot is clearly inspired by a fighter jet cockpit. The Thunder Dragon, the futuristic wedge shape, is very unusual. I think a lot of people would call it the Marmite car, in that you either tend to love it or hate it. Terra Scorcher again has elements of fighter jet to it, as does the Fire Dragon. The Saint Dragon is kind of an outlier in that it's much more of an organic, unusual looking shape. Again, another Marmite car in that you either tend to love it or hate it. Some considerations before buying. These are re-releases of vintage buggies, so as such they're not really designed for bashing or modern day circuits. You're very likely to break parts if you do either of those. The chassis itself is quite strong and robust, well, as far as vintage Tamiyas go, though it does have one well-documented weak point, and that is the front A5 part. It sits at the front of the gearbox. It mounts the bumper and holds the front suspension pins in. It tends to split on a frontal impact and is notorious for doing so. It's very well documented on the internet, and a quick search will turn up numerous videos on the issue. There are several workarounds, but the most common one is to replace the plastic A5 part with an aluminium one. I've done that on both of my buggies. Having said that, as is often the case, when you replace one weak part with a stronger one, you invariably expose a weakness somewhere else on the buggy. I found that out the hard way. Both my Terra Scorcher and Thunder Dragon broke on their shakedown runs in exactly the same spot. In the case of the Terra Scorcher, I jumped over a small mound of grass cuttings. It was only about 30 or 40 centimeters tall. I must have landed awkwardly and I split the front wishbone. And the Thunder Dragon, well, if you've seen my video, I'll probably put some B-roll up now. I actually hit the GoPro, which was resting on the ground, and that impact was enough to break the front wishbone in exactly the same spot. So the blue plastic that Tamiya uses on the wishbones is quite soft and bendable, and when you hit something it tends to split the plastic as it kind of wraps around the suspension pin and then pulls it backwards. It's a pain when it happens, but because the plastic is so soft, it doesn't shatter the plastic, it just splits it. So what you can do is remove the front suspension pin and reinsert the wishbone and reinsert the pin and continue driving. In fact, both of my shakedown run videos, the cars were completed in that manner, so they were both running like that. As long as you don't hit anything, you'll be fine. You will need to replace the part at some point. What I'm trying to say is that if you do decide to pick up one of these buggies, I highly recommend you stock up on the blue lower wishbone arms. Aside from that, the chassis is quite strong, well, for a vintage buggy at least. You will run through tires quite quickly though. The compound is quite soft and the spin spikes tend to wear down quite rapidly. Both of my buggies had issue with the white nylon gears in the gearbox. I think the mold that Tamiya is using isn't perfect, and so what you'll find is when you try to rotate the gears by hand during the build process, you'll notice rough spots. Now, in the case of my Terra Scorcher, I sat there with a magnifying glass, a small knife and a file, and kind of removed the imperfections on the nylon gears. With the Thunder Dragon, I decided not to bother and just ran a few battery packs through it, and that kind of bedded in the gears and the issue resolved itself. As for modern day electronics, well, it's a tight fit, but you'll have no issue fitting something like a Hobby Ring 1060 in there. LiPo batteries will fit, although if you're using LiPo batteries with the hard case, which is quite squared off, you may possibly struggle to fit them into the recess on the chassis. The recess is an oval shape. Tamiya provide on the Riris nylon bands, so that if you're using a smaller battery, you can use the nylon bands to hold it in place. The buggy itself will quite happily handle faster motors. I run super stocks through mine. Brushless shouldn't be a problem. Some other considerations: the thundershot, Thunder Dragon, Fire Dragon, and I believe the Saint Dragon also come with pre-cut and pre-painted bodies, so all you have to do is apply the decals. Terra Scorcher on the other hand does not have a pre-cut or pre-painted body, which means you can paint it whatever color you want. The downside though is it also does not come with window masks, so you're going to have to make those to mask out the windows. As to which one I recommend, well, regarding the re-releases, the Thundershot and Thunder Dragon are the cheapest. The Fire Dragon and Saint Dragon occupy the middle ground, and the Terra Scorcher is the most expensive. Now do remember that the Thunder Dragon and Thundershot do not come with bearings as standard, so you're going to need to factor that into the cost. Is it worth paying the extra for the Terra Scorcher? Well, if you primarily run in your backyard, on the street or at parks, you're not really going to benefit that much from the better handling that the Terra Scorcher provides. And so I would recommend that any of these buggies are fine, just go with the one you like the design of the most. If however you do race at circuits or tracks, or you're just looking for slightly better performance, then I think you'd probably be better going for the Terra Scorcher. The dual shocks up front and the stabilizer bar just help to keep it a bit more planted on rough terrain, and the universals just give it a little bit more drive efficiency. Now if you already have one of these buggies and you're considering getting another one, then it becomes more complicated. There isn't a huge difference between any of them. In fact, the builds are very similar, so it's not really easy to justify purchasing a second one. I think if you have one of the monoshock versions, so either the Thundershot or Thunder Dragon, and you wanted to get another one, and I would definitely recommend the Terra Scorcher, as it's the most different to the Thundershot and Thunder Dragon. If you already have a Terra Scorcher like I did, then going the other way, the Thunder Dragon or Thundershot, I suppose you could justify it. I mean, this is all just, you know, if you're trying to come up with reasons to justify buying another buggy, which most of us don't need anyway. I picked up the Thunder Dragon simply because I've always wanted one, and the fact that it came with a pre-cut and pre-painted body was a huge bonus, and because I was kind of interested to see how much of a difference the hop-ups fitted to the Terra Scorcher actually make to the chassis. In truth, not that much, but you know, anyway, it was just another excuse to buy another buggy, to be honest. So those are my thoughts on the Thundershot family of buggies from Tamiya. If you found this video useful, I'd appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is David, and you've been watching KCRC.